Hi, this is Tara Boston-Kemper with the Holistic Health Key Summit, and with me I have Robert Burney. Thank you for joining us, Robert.
I'm glad to be here.
Good. So Robert has done a few things with his life. He's got a really awesome long story, first of all, but more recently he's written a book called Codependence, The Dance of Wounded Souls. And I'll let him speak about codependence a little bit later. And then also, he's developed a whole new framework for working with inner child, um, which is really stellar. So, again, Robert, thanks for being here. If there's anything you want to add to that, feel free to.
Well, I'm sure I'll go along.
Okay, so, oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, yeah, I'll be adding as we go along.
Okay, perfect. So, my first question for you then is basically to speak a little bit about your own journey in terms of how you view well-being and how you got to that place.
Well, I'm a recovering alcoholic and addict,
Okay,
and so I've been clean and sober since January 3rd, 1984.
that's awesome.
And so it's 30 and a half years, which is amazing. But
Yeah, that's amazing.
so I got sober, and then I had to start figuring out how to live, because that's why I was drinking for it, because I didn't know how to live.
Right.
So I had to start figuring out how to live, and I started, working at the 12-step program to learn how to not drink. But I actually count my codependency recovery as starting on June 3rd, 1986. So I just had an anniversary here last week.
Congratulations. Happy anniversary.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a day when I changed a codependent pattern I had, and then I went home and started writing to try to figure out why I was doing what I was doing.
Okay.
And what I uncovered that night was that I was still even though a lot of the stuff I had been taught as a child, I had been thrown out consciously and intellectually in my late 20s or late teens, early 20s. Emotionally, it was still running my life.
Yes.
And when I saw that, I said, "This is horrible. I don't want to live this way anymore." And I made a commitment to do whatever I could to change that, to find out how to change that.
Okay, that's awesome. Can you speak a little bit about your childhood then, like the things you had thrown out and how emotionally they were still kind of sticking with you?
Well, I come from what I call an all-American family,
Yes.
kind of a Norman Rockwell kind of a family. I mean, I grew up on a farm in the Midwest, and
Yeah.
my father was perfectly what he was trained to be, which is John Wayne. And
Okay.
his programming was anger is the only appropriate emotion for a man.
Oh, that hurts my heart for a minute. It does, yeah.
He did had no permission to feel scared or hurt or sad, and never showed me any of those things.
Right.
And my mother was perfectly what she was trained to be, which is a self-sacrificing martyr with no boundaries and no self-worth.
June Cleaver?
What?
I
Yeah,
said June Cleaver? Yeah.
yeah. And so the family looked pretty good. I mean, it was like middle class family and good. We didn't have any. There's no alcoholism or
Yeah.
overt dysfunction. So I compared my family to other families and thought my family was fine. It was just there was something wrong with me because I always felt like there was something wrong with me.
Right.
So when I first got into recovery, first got sober, I thought my family was fine, but I was screwed up. And then it was as I was uncovering things that I came to realize that there's not just some dysfunctional families. All families are dysfunctional. Our culture is emotionally dishonest and dysfunctional and teaches us a whole bunch of really screwed up things about what the nature and purpose of life is and about what it means to be human.
Right. Can you elaborate on the nature, like your perception, obviously, or your view of the nature and purpose of life, and what it means to be human?
Well, what I believe is that who we really are is spiritual beings having a human experience.
Okay.
And what we got taught is that basically we're sinful, shameful, defective humans who have to earn some kind of spiritual existence.
Right.
The exact opposite of what I believe the truth is.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and in fact, the first time somebody ever told me that I was a spiritual being having a human experience, my initial reaction was to get angry. And my first thought was, that means I have to be out among them. Because I didn't know how to do human relationships. I didn't want to do human relationships. I wanted to go up on a mountain and meditate my way to God or something.
Right.
I didn't know how to do it. Because as soon as I heard that, I realized if I'm a spiritual being having a human experience, then I'm not here to get spiritual. I'm here to access that spirit and bring it into my human relationships.
Oh.
And that meant I had to learn how to live, how to interact with other human beings. And I didn't know how to do that.
Oh yeah, that's really powerful. Yeah.
And one of the things I've said for years is that the only reason to do inner child healing is if you're going to interact with other human beings. Because if you are, they're going to push you.
Yes, that's actually funny. Yeah. So what about, I do want to give you a chance. I want you to speak to the codependency. So I think that, I imagine anyway, that most people hear that and think something specific. So I'd like for you to explain, your understanding of it, how you view it, how it impacts our lives.
Well, in the first place, it's a word that's much misunderstood because it's evolved and expanded a lot since it was first coined.
Yeah.
It was a term that came out of the alcoholism recovery movement. When Alcoholics Anonymous was first started in 1935, it was the first time there was ever an effective treatment for alcoholism. Prior to that, and at that time, there were just wings in the mental hospital where they locked up the wet brains. And so they had. It's the first time there was ever an effective treatment for alcoholism. So it was so successful that by the 1950s, they were setting up alcoholism treatment centers.
Okay.
And the alcoholism treatment centers were focused on what this Alcoholics Anonymous was focused on, which is getting the alcoholic sober. And they wouldn't really pay much attention to the family members or significant others. But then they started noticing they had some patterns of behavior in common, some similar traits. So they came up with a term for it. And the term was co-alcoholic. And it was really a literal co-with.
Yeah.
And the belief was that people around the alcoholic got sick because of the alcoholic's drinking and behavior. And then we hit the 1960s and sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and so by the end of the 60s, early 70s, the federal government was putting money into the treatment centers, but telling them they had to treat addicts also. So they had to change the name of the treatment centers from alcoholic treatment centers to chemical dependency treatment centers.
Okay.
So co-alcoholics became codependents.
Yeah.
And it was still pretty much a literal dependent, that the people got sick because the alcoholic or addict.
Yeah.
But by the late 70s, there was research being going on in different fields. One was in terms of studying children who'd grown up in alcoholic families to see how much it affected them. Another was in terms of the family systems dynamics, and they were the first people that started using the term dysfunctional families.
Okay.
And the first of what came to be the inner child healing books were coming out about the same time. And so by the mid-'80s, books were coming out about codependence as a disease in and of itself. And it wasn't just about people that were, related to, or involved with alcoholics. Because what they're starting to see is that the reason that people were involved with alcoholics the reason they were sick wasn't because they were involved with alcoholics. They were involved with alcoholics because they were sick. Because they were attracted to that because of their childhood experiences.
Oh, that's fascinating, yeah.
And so what codependence really is, in my understanding, is an ego defense system that is adapted by our egos in early childhood to help us survive.
Okay.
Because we learned how to relate to ourselves, to life, and other people in early childhood from people who were wounded in their childhoods.
Right.
And part of what's so important to understand about codependence has to do with the natural child developmental process. Because the part of a child's brain that understands cause and effect and logic and abstract concepts like time or death doesn't fully develop until around 7 years old.
Okay.
That's why they call that the age of reason. That's why my grandson, a couple months after his 7th birthday, on the way to school one day, all of a sudden he says, "How does Santa Claus get to every house in the world in one night?" Because his mind's developed. Right? But prior to the age of reason, children are egocentric and magical thinking. So when we're little kids, our parents are our higher powers. They're the God and Goddess in our life. And we have no realistic perspective of them whatsoever. And so when we're little, when we're 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, we're not capable of processed thought. We're not capable of saying to ourselves, "Wow, Mom must be having a really bad day. That's why she's yelling at me." We just know Mom's yelling at us.
Right.
And so any kind of abuse or deprivation, any lack of bonding, anything in the environment that's uncomfortable, alcoholism, fighting, anxiety, depression, stress, we end up internalizing it and thinking it's our fault. Because we're the center of the universe as far as we know.
Right.
And that's where the core of the disease comes from. It's what I call toxic shame. And the difference between guilt and shame, in my definition, is that guilt is about behavior. I did something wrong, I made a mistake. Shame is about our being. Something's wrong with me. I'm a mistake.
Yeah.
And that's the foundation we build our relationship with ourselves on, is this feeling there's something wrong with me.
That toxic shame.
I'm defective and unlovable and unworthy because our parents were wounded and didn't know how to love themselves or be emotionally healthy.
Right, right. That makes me and I think I'm thinking, like, as you were speaking to that, most people don't really develop memories before the age of like 3 and 4 and 5. That's whenever that really starts to, you really start to remember. So all the things that happen to you that you internalize, you don't even remember.
No, a lot of them.
Yeah. So how do you work with this? How do you do work with this? Like the toxic shame and the inner child, and because this is all really powerful stuff. I mean, what you're speaking to right now.
Well, what's so important, we need to work on changing our core relationship with ourselves,
Yeah.
because that's where the problem is.
Yeah, yeah.
The core of our relationship with ourselves, we feel unworthy and unlovable. And so what happens is that our ego, in childhood, our ego adapts an emotional and behavioral defense system. That's what the codependency is. To try to control our behavior and emotions according to the rules of our dysfunctional family so we can survive and fit in. Because a child's job, one of a child's jobs is to manipulate its environment. Children are born manipulators, and they do what.
Yes.
So they'll take, if throwing temper tantrums works, if crying works, if being the good child is what works, if being invisible is what works, that's what a child will adapt. And the neurological researchers nowadays actually say that the neural pathways in our brain that relate to relating to other human beings are pretty well set by the time we're 4 or 5 years old. So in other words, our relationship patterns are pretty set by the time we're 5 years old. How scary is that?
That's very scary, yeah.
The bad part about it is we don't get taught how to change those neural pathways. In culture, and in my book I talk about how I believe that the more in civilized culture, the more progress civilization made, the more they distance themselves from nature, natural law, the more dysfunctional it got.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
In Aboriginal societies that respected nature and natural law, like the Native American, when a child got to adolescence, they had training and initiation rites to teach them how to be an adult. We got sent to junior high school.
Right. It's horrible. Yes, it's torture, absolutely.
So we never got taught how to change those neural pathways.
Yeah.
And so, and the ego isn't a bad thing or a negative thing in and of itself. We just got programmed really badly.
Yeah, yeah.
The dysfunctional programming started with fairy tales that taught us when we meet our prince or princess, we're going to live happily ever after.
Right.
Isn't the way it works.
No. Yes, not at all.
I used to call it the frog princess syndrome. I felt like I was an ugly frog and needed a princess to turn me into a prince. Well, if I think I have to have that other person in my life to be okay, then what I do is end up trying to control that other person. And that's not love.
Not at all.
And then, of course, the fairy tales were followed up by the books and the movies and the songs that taught me that, like what love is I can't smile without you, I can't live without you, you are my everything. And that's not love either, that's an addiction. That's making the other person our drug of choice or our power. So we were really set up to not know how to do romantic relationships in a healthy way. But we were also just set up for life by the fairy tales because of the whole happily ever after thing.
Right.
We got the message that there was a destination to reach, and when we get there, everything's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And life doesn't work that way.
And what is there? Like this arbitrary kind of thing, like, yeah.
The thing is, we don't feel comfortable here in our own skins right now, and we think we have to get there to be okay. And it doesn't work.
Right.
Because even if we get there, it's not going to make us feel the way we want it to make us feel, because we're trying to fill a whole inside of us with something from the outside.
Right.
And so when we get there, we just have to find another there to go after. But we're always, I realized I lived my life like it was a dress rehearsal for when my life was really going to start, when I got the relationship or the money or the success. And so that's where we spend most of our life, is not being present now because we're trying to figure out how to get there.
Right.
And focused on there. And it doesn't work, that's one of the core dynamics of codependency, is what I call destination thinking.
Yeah.
All caught up in the future and missing out on today. And life isn't about reaching a destination. Life's a journey. We want to start enjoying the journey more.
Right. And having that human experience.
Yeah,
Being
yeah,
present and being human. Yeah.
yeah. But part of the problem, we got the message, part of what's important to realize in this is that traditional family values in our culture is patriarchal supremacy with children and women treated like property.
Yes.
We come out of a tradition of children should be seen and not heard, spare the rod and spoil the child. One of the first books I ever read that had anything to do with inner child healing was a book called The Drama of the Gifted Child.
Oh my God, I love that book. Oh,
By
I love that book.
a German author named Alice Miller. And it's actually a pretty thick, dense book, and I never got through it.
It's heady. Yeah, it was hard to read. Yeah.
But early on, she said something that really struck me, and she talked about how the German philosophers of the 19th century were the precursors of the modern psychological movement, used to emphasize how important it was in order to control children's behavior to stamp out their exuberance. In other words, you got to break their spirits to make them behave, and that's basically where we came out of in our traditional our culture,
Right.
And there wasn't even such a thing as healthy parenting classes until like 25, 30 years ago. Children could do whatever they wanted to their kids. A lot of us had things done to us in childhood that our parents would go to jail for today.
Yeah.
Because children weren't seen as individuals with rights.
Yeah.
And so it's real important. So we got the message, one of a child's jobs is to explore its environment, to and touch things and taste things and get into things.
Right.
And a lot of us got shamed and punished for that. We got the message it was shameful and bad to make mistakes, to spill the milk or whatever. That it was shameful and bad to do anything that upset our parents.
Yeah.
That it was shameful and bad to be emotional. Our parents taught us, most of us really clearly, it was not okay to set boundaries with them. They didn't want to hear it. They didn't want it. Their way or the highway,
Yeah.
And a lot of us learned it wasn't okay to be sexual. So basically the rules we learned in childhood were that life's a test you can fail, and you can fail it by being an imperfect human being.
Right.
And we grew up in black and white society where right is what you should do and wrong is bad and shameful.
Yes.
We weren't taught as little kids to make good choices. This is right and that's wrong. And so the enforcer for the ego in this codependent defense system is what I call the critical parent voice. And this is programming in our own mind that is from early childhood that's trying to control our behavior and emotions using the same tools that were used on us, which is fear and shame and guilt. And according to the rules we learned in childhood, and according to the, believing that it was, that it was wrong and shameful to be imperfect human being.
Yeah.
And so the critical parent voice is judging and shaming us for being imperfect. At the same time, it sends us these messages that cause us to be really afraid of doing it wrong and obsessively try to figure out how to do it right. And it's a really lousy way to live.
Yes.
It's
perpetual. You never can do it right. It's never good enough. You'll never succeed. I mean, it's just this, keep trying harder, that's exhausting.
And we got taught, on top of part of what's so important in recovery is to learn how to intervene in our own internal process.
Yeah.
To stop letting the old tapes and the old ones run the show.
Mm-hmm.
Because what codependency does is it causes us to feel like the victim of our own thoughts and our own feelings and like our own worst enemy.
Right.
We need to learn how to be our own best friend.
Right.
And so it's real important to start understanding the dynamics of the disease. And the first dynamic is that destination thinking, the focusing on the future all the time. But then on top of it, we got to taught to look outside for our self-definition and self-worth. To people, places, and things, money, property, and prestige, accomplishments, popularity, relationships.
Right.
And traditionally, women were taught to be codependent, that is, take their self-definition and self-worth from their relationship with men, including taking their name from men. Whereas men were taught to be codependent on their work, on bringing home the bacon, on being a supplier.
The breadwinner, yes.
Also taught to be emotionally shut down, and that anger was the only emotion that was okay to feel.
Yeah.
So a woman, in order to be successful, had to have a successful relationship with a man who was emotionally unavailable and focused on his work. I mean, what a setup!
Right. Yeah. That sounds horrible.
Yeah, and part of one of the negative effects of the feminist movement, everything is both good news and bad news.
Yeah.
But one of the negative effects of the feminist movement is a lot of women now think they have to be perfect in both their relationships and their work in order to be okay. So it's a double setup.
Right.
But we got taught to look outside for our self-definition and self-worth, not only to the people, place, and things stuff, but also to the external manifestations of our own being, like looks and talent and intelligence.
Yeah.
And all those outside or external things are they potentially or ultimately temporary.
They're all
You take it away.
Yes.
And when we base how we feel about ourselves on something that gets subject to change, which everything is, our whole world can fall apart.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And so part of what I learned to do in my recovery is make a distinction, draw a boundary for myself between what I call ego strength and true self-worth. Okay. And the ego strength is about the outside or external things. And there's nothing wrong with any of them. There's nothing wrong with being smart or good-looking or rich or successful. It's when we think that's what gives us worth that we're being codependent. Codependent, my definition, is outer or external dependent to feel good about ourselves.
Okay.
And I think that it more accurately could be described as worshiping false gods or being too attached to the illusion.
Okay, yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
I like that term, yeah.
Where our true worth comes from is our spiritual essence. That we're spiritual beings having a human experience. We're connected to the source. We're children of God or God, part of the Great Spirit, however you want to say it. But we have worth because we're connected to the oneness of everything, not anything temporary outside of us or external. And it's the exact opposite of what we were talking about. 180 degrees the opposite.
Yeah.
And so it's real important to start knowing that we have worth. All human beings have worth inherently because we're connected to the oneness of everything. Because codependency is all based on, is a defense system based on trying to keep hidden the fact that we're shameful and unworthy, and it's a lie. It's really screwed up.
I need you to say that again, I think, because that's really powerful.
Well, codependency is a defense system that's set up to try to keep hidden the fact that we're shameful and unworthy, and it's a lie.
Yeah.
It's all based on a lie, and it's based on this false programming about who we are and how to define ourselves and find our worth.
Right.
And part of what's so important with this stuff is we need to start counter-programming to the old tapes and the old wounds.
Yeah.
Because our emotions are a really important part of who we are.
Yes.
Our emotions are what tell us who we are, but we all got taught to have a really screwed up relationship with our own emotions in childhood. And it's really important to recognize that some of our emotions are telling us the truth and some of them aren't. The feelings that we're having, the emotional reactions, the emotional buttons that get pushed that cause us to reactivate to trigger childhood wounds, what we're feeling when that happens is what the child felt then, not what's appropriate for an adult of our age and knowledge and experience to feel in this particular situation today.
Okay.
So when we're triggered in an old wound, we're not being present in the moment, and we're not relating to it out of our present day level of consciousness. But the trouble is, when it gets triggered, it feels like our total reality.
Oh, it feels real. Absolutely,
Yeah.
it does. Yep.
It is, it is real.
Yes.
It's actual, the emotions are actual energy that manifests in our body, and it's real, but it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with truth or fact.
Right. Yes.
So that's where we have to start counter-programming. 12-step recovery has some real good little sayings that are real helpful, and a couple of them are fake it till you make it, or act as if. I had to start acting as if I was lovable and worthy, even though it didn't feel like it.
Oh, okay. I like that a lot.
Started telling myself there was an unconditionally loving higher power, even though it felt like God was some kind of a sadistic SOB who was punishing me personally.
Right.
And so I had to start counter-programming to those negative reactions to start changing my relationship with myself and mine.
Yeah.
And not only were we taught to look outside to determine our worth, we were taught to do it in comparison. If you had better grades, you had worth, you had better grades then, if you're better looking then, if you're a better athlete then.
Yeah.
And so growing up in a codependent culture, what we learned is that self-worth is a competitive issue.
Yeah.
Which means in order to feel good about myself, I have to have other people I look down on. So here still doesn't feel okay, but at least it's better than them.
Yeah.
Right? I'll be okay till I get there. It's a really crappy way to live.
It is. That's absolutely right. Yeah.
The reason we don't love our neighbor as ourselves, we never got taught how to love ourselves.
Right, and now we're asked to love our neighbor? Like, that's not going to work. Yes.
So So it's so important. In order to change our relationship with anything, we need to change our perspective of it. You know, I have use it in my book. There's an old joke about three blind men describing an elephant by touch.
Mm-hmm.
And they're touching three different parts of the elephant and describing three completely different things.
Yeah.
And what I say in the book is that each is speaking his own truth. They just have a lousy perspective. You know?
Yeah.
And that's basically what codependency is. We have a lousy perspective of who we are and how to do what human means. You know, the meaning and purpose of life. And so we need to start changing our relationship with ourselves. Because, you know, when we were, not only did we get taught, you know, to judge ourselves for being human and to all the dysfunctional programming we got,
Right.
but we're also taught to keep up appearances. You know,
Yeah.
our parents were usually more afraid of what the neighbors thought about them because of our behavior than they were of what our behavior was, because they didn't know enough to even know what caused our behavior.
Right.
You know, and so they were worried. They wanted to. Their ego was all wrapped up in how they related to us and wanted us to look good,
Yes.
so they would look good. You know,
Yeah.
and so that's part of what's important to realize is the way our parents treated us in childhood wasn't personal.
Yeah.
They couldn't see us as separate individuals, different from them. They saw us as extensions of them.
Yeah.
You know? And so I had spent most of my life up till to the time I started working on this stuff, feeling like my deepest, you know, thoughts and feelings were shameful and bad, and I had to keep them hidden from other people.
Yeah.
But then when I felt bad, I compared how I felt inside to how the other people looked on the outside.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
They knew something I didn't know. You know, oh, look at that happy couple. Why can't I have a relationship?
Yes, and then you're doing it wrong. So it must be me. I'm doing everything wrong. I can't. You know, it just comes back to that. Yeah.
And what I need to realize is they're all keeping up appearances too.
Right.
But he got taught to be emotionally dishonest and manipulative in childhood. It's like the old song about games people play, never saying what they mean, never meaning what they say, you know. And that's how society works. Nobody talks about what's real. You know, they gossip and they talk about politics and sports and whatever, but they don't talk about what's real because they don't know, you know.
Right.
And so what's so important is to really start, and when we were kids, we had to focus on them.
Yeah.
You know, they were the big people, and we were the little people. And if we come from a family that had fighting or alcoholism or some overt dysfunction, then a lot of times we became hyper vigilant in trying to read them, you know. Because a lot of times we didn't know if it was safe to come home into the house after school, you know, in some families. And so we focused on them. We went to school, we focused on them, trying to figure out how to fit in there. We just grew up focusing outside and never seeing ourselves clearly because we're looking at ourselves through this filter of shame and judgment for being imperfect. And so as long as we weren't seeing ourselves clearly, we weren't seeing other people clearly, we weren't seeing life clearly.
Right.
And so in order to change how we relate to everything, we need to change our perspective of it. So the key step in doing that is to develop a detached, objective observer perspective or witness perspective.
Yep, I like that. Okay.
Yeah. Except the problem with that is we already have a witness perspective, but it's a critical parent voice. It's like the negative play-by-play announcer in our life. They tell us that's stupid, and what are you doing that for? And that was, you know, and I used to just think that's how I thought. I didn't realize everyone has a critical parent voice.
Oh, so then you feel totally isolated, like I'm doing everything wrong still because I'm the only one who thinks this about myself.
Right.
Yes. Wow.
And so it's real important to start developing. It was real important for me to realize that programming is not part of my true self. It's not part of who I truly am. It's not telling me the truth, and I need to stop buying into it. Learn how to stop giving it power.
Right.
And one of the things I always ask people when I start talking about the observer perspective is whether they've done any Eastern meditation practices or any of the New Age kind of things where they talk about observer perspective.
Yeah.
And I think, how old is your doggy?
How did you? That's he's aboard the train right now.
He's observing.
He is observing. We should take note from the dogs, right?
Yeah. So the thing about the Eastern meditation practices, they teach an observer perspective, but it's a passive observer, where you observe your thoughts and your feelings, but you don't actually change anything.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Some people actually use meditation as a form of antidepressant to stay disassociated from feelings.
Oh, wow.
That's not what we want, you know.
Yeah.
We want this observer I'm talking about is a proactive, intervening observer. We actually go in and change the ego programming.
So this observer that you're talking about interrupts the patterns that have been in place instead of just kind of watching them.
Yeah, it becomes the empowered adult part of us that has spiritual connection and recovery tools and is making choices in our life.
Okay.
Instead of just reacting, because what we have is these inner child places, these emotional wounds, emotional buttons.
Yeah.
That are, like inner minefield that gets triggered. We have these little explosions,
Right, we do.
And then what happens is the critical parent voice comes in and judges and shames ourselves for having the feelings, or else tries to blame them all on somebody else, And so basically what we've been doing is we've been inner child abuse all our life. We need to develop this observer to be able to start intervening internally to shut up the critical parent voice.
Right.
And to become the loving parent to the inner child. And being a parent includes setting boundaries.
Yes.
The parent's job to set boundaries is the child's job to test the boundaries,
Right.
But they need to be consistent boundaries. Inconsistent boundaries make children feel insecure and unsafe because they don't know what the rules are.
Right.
And so we need to be able to start being loving and compassionate to our own inner children,
Yes.
and set boundaries with them. It's like, we all have like this desperately needy, desperately lonely little kid inside that is starved for love and affection, and wants the relationship so bad.
Yes.
That's the part of us that wants to text message 40 times a day,
Oh my gosh, right?
Because children want instant gratification.
Yes.
And so we need to start setting boundaries to that part of us, and not either act it out or shame ourselves for it.
Yeah.
And so it's real important to start being able to see ourselves more clearly and to start changing. We can actually change the neural programming in our neural pathways in our brain by doing this work.
I love that.
Internal boundaries.
That's like really hopeful and empowering to hear that you can, we can reprogram our own like pathways, and we can become that loving parent, and we can do all of these things.
Yeah. And it's so important because out of the programming, growing up in black and white society, we tend to see things as either or.
Yeah.
We react to extremes. We underreact or we overreact.
Right.
Real common pattern is we underreact, stuff it down, and so it builds up so much pressure, then we explode and we overreact. And then we feel ashamed and crazy and we go back to stuffing it down again.
Yes, we do.
So
right.
We overact or underreact. We blame it all on ourselves or blame it on somebody else. We stay in a relationship that's not working and think we're never ever going to have a relationship again.
Right.
And so when we're reacting, we're not making conscious choices. Somebody who's not in a relationship because they've been hurt in relationships and they don't know how to do a relationship, that's not a choice, that's a reaction.
Yes.
In my book, I use the example of if you never knew how to say no, if you never knew it was okay to say no, then you never really said yes. It's a real dependent thing to say yes to things we don't want to say yes to and then feel resentful and victimized.
Oh my gosh. Yes, you are so preaching to the choir right now. That was for me, to be able to say no and set my own boundaries was a huge growth experience.
It was a concept that was like so foreign when I even first heard it. Boundaries, what's that?
What's a boundary? No, I don't have those. I don't need them. Yeah.
And so it's so important to realize that we've just been reacting. When I was in early recovery, I used to call responsibility the R word, because to me it was a dirty word. I was responsible for everybody and everything. I thought responsibility was a word that had like chains hanging off it.
Yeah.
And so, but then I saw it written differently. It was actually in the medicine cards. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they had written it differently, and it was written as the ability to respond. And that's why I realized in recovery I needed to learn to stop reacting and start having the ability to respond and make conscious choices.
Yeah.
And part of what's so important is to start, like I said in my book, is to start seeing the numbers 2 through 9 instead of thinking the choice is just 1 or 10.
Yes, the shades of gray, they exist.
Yeah,
it's not just
that's where life really happens, is in the gray area and not in the black and white.
Yeah, there is no black and white. That's fake. I mean, they exist, but it's not just those two. Like you say, it's not just this binary. It's this whole spectrum of color that we're, what's the word, programmed to kind of ignore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because there's more safety and security in black and white. If I think I'm right and everybody else is wrong, there's more safety and security in that.
Yeah.
And in the gray area, it's like there's choices to make.
Yeah. I love that I think you're speaking. I love Michael Beckwith too. I think he's fabulous. And you said something that reminded me of him, that, choice is a function, reactions are a function of ignorance, and choice is a function of awareness. That when we don't know, we just react, that we make these unconscious reactions. And when we finally know and we have knowledge and insight into ourselves, I think most importantly, that we make these conscious choices. I love that. I love that so much.
And it's so important to own that we have choices, because
Yes.
when we feel like a victim, we feel like we don't have choices,
Yes.
And it's really important to own that we have choices. And in one of my articles, I talk about if somebody sticks a gun in your face and says your money or your life, you do have a choice.
Right. A terrible choice, but it's a choice.
Yeah, we don't like our choices a lot of time in life because we don't know what the outcome's going to be, and we're scared to death of doing it wrong.
Right, right.
But it's really important to own that we do have choices.
We absolutely do, yes.
In order to be empowered, And so, and I believe basically that the Serenity Prayer is like a mystical formula for how to do life successfully, and that we were basically programmed growing up to live the Serenity Prayer backwards, to think we should be in control of things we don't have control of.
Right, right.
Of people and life, and to not have any effective control over what we do have control over, because we're trying to control ourselves with shame and judgment and fear.
Right. And
when we're shaming ourselves, what happens is eventually the rebel in us rebels against that. And that's when we do what I call my book, The Battle Cry of Codependency, which is I'll show you, I'll get me. You hurt me, then I do something to hurt myself, because I go to one of my old tools for nurturing myself and going unconscious, like or drugs or food or sex or whatever, And so you hurt me and then I hurt myself, trying to nurture myself,
Right, right.
And so was so important for me to realize that what I don't have control over is almost everything,
Yes.
The thing I always have some control over is my attitude towards the things I don't have control over.
I love that. That really, we think, I have control of my life. No, you don't. Like, you have control of the way that you make choices. Like, you make choices in your life, and that's your control.
We basically have control over our own attitudes and our own behaviors.
Yeah, that's basically
it. Own having choices because we've got all this programming that we're reacting out of that we don't even know is there. It's like, because we all learned it was shameful to be wrong, so many times in relationships, it turns into a power struggle about who's right and who's wrong.
Right.
That's not even the right question,
Right, right.
The questions we need to start asking is, why am I reacting that way? How old am I feeling when that happens?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Anytime there's a problem in a relationship, it's actually because the interaction of the inner child wounds of the two people. So it's just so important to start, like one of the things we need to do is change. We need to own that we have the power to change our beliefs and our definitions. Right. And like the definition that I learned of a romantic relationship growing up doesn't work. That whole, addiction thing doesn't work,
Yeah.
And we're actually taught to be victims of love, like it's some like camouflaged hole in the sidewalk we actually stepped in. Oh, I can't help it, I love him. I can't help it, I love her, Instead of owning that it's a choice to love, And so we really need to own that we have choices and take responsibility for those choices instead of being the victim of, we're so set up to feel like the victim of love, and then people die over it, because.
Oh my gosh, you are so right. I'm thinking of, we expect to get hit by this thunderbolt or this lightning strike and feel totally and passionately in love, and then when that feeling fades, because it does, then we are left with like, this is it? Like, this isn't it? Like, I'm supposed to feel excited all the time when...
Actually, falling in love is actually a form of temporary insanity.
Right?
And it's based
like
on fantasy and fairy tale.
Yes. And then once it's done, it is a choice. Being in love is a choice. And you...
Yeah, well, it actually didn't have much to do with actually loving the person, feeling in love with them.
Yeah.
But I actually believe, in a long-term relationship, you can fall in love and out of love and in love and all, as long as you're working through stuff, you go through different periods.
I totally think like the ebb and flow of a relationship. It does. It has its highs and lows. That's totally realistic. I love that.
But it isn't happily ever after, when we get to it together, and so the other thing is so important. most of us, we have this, like I said, desperately needy, desperately lonely child inside. And so we want it so bad that we ignore all the red lights and warning signs.
Right.
And we're not paying attention. One of my clients years ago said she realized that, she put it really well, she realized that with men all her life, she was coming from the place of like she was auditioning. You know, does he like me? Does he like me? Does he like me? And never stopped to ask if she liked him.
Right, right.
And so we need to, like pay attention and be the auditioner. And it says, this person got, is they worth my time and energy instead of just coming from that needy little child, And part of the way the dynamics of codependency work is that because of the ways we were wounded in childhood, we have this radar that causes us to be attracted to people who will recreate who feel familiar.
Oh my gosh.
Feel familiar because they're going to recreate our childhood emotional dynamics we have with our parents.
Yep.
So we have radar that causes us to be attracted to the very people that will repeat our wounds for us. It's so important for me to realize if I met somebody that felt like my soulmate, I better watch out.
Yes. Oh my gosh, yeah. That we perpetuate our own cycles because we have these early childhood experiences and oh my gosh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's definitely traumatic because we're traumatized in childhood, and then the defenses our ego adapts to protect us cause us to re-traumatize ourselves as adults and keep repeating the same wounds over and over again.
And then, the people who fill our voids are really the ones that will help to, will leave or somehow help in creating them again. That we set that up, but yeah.
So what's important is to see it in a spiritual context and realize that's an opportunity for growth.
Yeah.
People come into our life to push our buttons so we can get in touch with them and heal them. But not to make us a half into a hole or to get us happily ever after, And so that's why, I had to change my definition of a romantic relationship into what a romantic relationship is an opportunity for growth.
Yes.
And then, like my latest book on romantic relationship it's romantic relationships, the greatest arena for spiritual and emotional growth, because that's what romantic relationships are.
Yeah. Yeah, they really are. Mm-hmm.
And so what's so important is to pick somebody who's also looking at their wounds. Mm-hmm. Because if somebody's not looking at their own issues, then they're going to get into that place where they're right and you're wrong, and they're going to blame you.
Yeah.
Because they're not willing to look at their side of the street.
Yeah.
And we need to look at those subconscious, buried attitudes and beliefs and the wounds in order to start owning our side of the street and taking responsibility for it instead of blaming it on somebody else.
I really like that you speak to having to own what's ours and having to, because that is really important. Like that focus on what am I bringing to the table and how is this impacting my experience and my life and my, relationships. And that goes back to we can only really control our behaviors and our attitudes.
Right.
Not really anything else.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so, and what I came to realize is a lot of my emotional reactions were set up by my attitudes and beliefs.
Yeah.
And part of what was so important for me to realize is that growing up, basically, I learned that other people had control over my feelings and I had control over their feelings. Mm-hmm. What I had to realize in recovery is that's not the truth. The truth is no one has the power to make me feel hurt or make me feel angry unless I give it to them. The way I give it to them is with my expectations.
Yeah.
So in other words, I'm getting hurt or angry because then I do what I want them to. And a lot of times I hadn't told them what I wanted. They were supposed to read my mind.
Right. Yeah, you're being mind readers.
It was too risky. It was too much of a risk to ask for what I wanted.
Yeah.
I had to manipulate it,
Yeah, yes, it does. It becomes manipulation.
Like I said, we all had learned some way of, looking down on other people to feel good about myself. One of mine was I was nicer than other people. Just this nice guy doing things for people. I didn't expect anything in return. Oh, crap. That was a bunch of crap.
Right.
Of course I expected things in return. But I wasn't honest with myself enough to even admit it because I was taught that was selfish.
Yeah. And that makes me think of the boundaries. You spoke about boundaries too. That makes me think about not having boundaries for interactions or what you give or, maybe never saying no to people, only saying yes all the time. And yeah.
Set up to feel like a victim.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I have one more question, Robert. If you had to share with the audience any one thing that would help them come back to center, or enhance their own sense of well-being. Maybe like one takeaway for the audience, or like a daily practice they could do on their own to try to get them back to a sense of well-being, a greater sense of well-being.
Well, the real key is to be observing yourself. We need to be observing what's going on inside of ourselves so that we can start taking responsibility for it. As long as we're focused outside, then we're always trying to get our needs met by manipulating the outside situation, and it doesn't work. We want to start focusing inside and starting to learn how to stop being the victim of our own thoughts and our own feelings,
Yes.
and to learn how to have internal boundaries so that we can, that's what makes it easier to have external boundaries, because we want to be able to do it from the inside out rather than from the outside in. Because when we're trying to do it from the outside in, we're trying to do it perfect.
Right.
And we're never going to be able to do it perfect,
Yeah.
And so we're here to learn and grow, and it's not about getting to happily ever after. It's not about doing it perfect or right. And so what we're trying, there's so many books and churches and everything nowadays. They're telling people they need to learn to love themselves, but they don't really tell them how to do it, And the thing is, you can't think yourself to loving yourself. You have to change how you're relating to yourself.
Yeah.
And so that involves, setting the internal boundaries and stop setting ourselves up to feel like the victim of ourselves.
Yeah, yeah.
And our own wounds. Because what codependency does is it causes patterns and issues, and then causes us to turn around and judge and shame ourselves for having the patterns and issues.
Yes, which is...
It's nasty stuff.
Yes, yes.
Only way to stop it is to bring some love into it. Right. And that's love for ourselves, by some compassion for ourselves, and knowing we were just little kids. It wasn't our fault.
Right.
It wasn't because there was something wrong with us.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And there's power in knowing. Like, once you know, okay, like, now you can do different.
Yeah. We have to be aware of it before we can change it.
Yeah, and there's no sense in beating ourselves up. That's not helpful by any means. So
that's what we learned to do growing up, is judge ourselves for not being perfect. Right. And the truth is, we're never going to be perfect, but we are perfect in the spirit.
Right.
We're never going to be human perfect.
Yeah, I don't even think, that would be different for everybody anyway. There's no such thing as clearly no such thing as perfect, that it's all an illusion. It's all...
An adventure, it's all part of the adventure.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Robert, what was the name of the book that you said that you recently published?
The latest one was Romantic Relationships, the Greatest Arena for Spiritual and Emotional Growth.
Okay. Where can people access that? Or where can people...
Either through my website, which is joy2meu, JOY2MEU.com, or they can get it through Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Or...
Okay, fabulous. Well, this has been wonderful. This has been a wonderful conversation, and I hope you got to share a lot of what you wanted to. So thank you, Robert, for joining us. Thank you to everybody for listening, and I hope you got as much out of this as I did. And this is, again, I'm Tara Vossen-Kemper, and this is the Holistic Health Key Summit, and I will see you on the next interview. Thank you.